Thank you very much for being here. I'm eager to hear your presentation.
Okay, good. Thank you, Pastor. I want you to look to the person at your left. If there's nobody on your left, look either forward or backward. Look at the person on your left, please. And now I want you to look at the person on your right. Nobody there, look up or back. Okay. The three of you share something in common. Three of you share something in common. That's close. You are all 100% human. Not part human. Not 99% human. You are all 100% human. In addition to that, you are all intelligent. I want you to put that in the back of your mind as I go through this presentation. And I want to thank my pastor, Martin Wildauer, for hosting me here today. I am Gary Locklear, professor of computer science and science at Concordia University, Wisconsin. And yeah, I'm an old person too. You know, initially when Pastor Wildauer asked me to talk about this, I got pretty excited because science, and especially origins, is a personal avocation of mine. And then my pastor showed me, because I titled my talk, The Missing Link, Information. Then he showed me the flyers that he printed up. And I said, I don't know if that's it or not. I hope you'll forgive me. Unlike Pastor Wildauer, although I could possibly memorize things, I typically don't. And if I don't follow my notes, the problem is I start talking on a tangent. So this will keep me a little bit on track, so it will not be longer than the 2 hours that we had originally planned for this here. Good. Evolution has been searching for the missing link ever since Darwin. What do people mean when they say the missing link? In the evolution idea or model, the missing link is that intermediate form between two other things. You see, in evolution, everything is somehow related. There was an ancestral first form of life. There was an ancestral first mammal. So for human beings, at some point in the distant past, we didn't look like human beings. We weren't human beings. Somehow we developed through what are called missing links. This is the latest edition of Scientific American, May 2017. Scientific American will not talk about the creation model of origins. They'll talk about the evolution model of origins. And I just have a copy of this. It says missing links. So apparently, in the evolution model, there are these connections between kinds of life that the model says must have happened, but yet for some reason we can't find them. The missing link then would be that vital evidence or ingredient that would be necessary to show that evolution was true. So if you subscribe to the evolution model, you're going to have to look for these intermediate forms, these missing links. But you know what? There's even a bigger missing link. Something bigger than just the idea that there was something in between ape-like creatures and human beings. What I want to share with you this evening and focus on is the idea that the vital ingredient that's really missing out of evolution is information. The origin of information. Where did information come from? What is information? And why is this such a vital ingredient for origins of any kind? Let me make sure that I tell you a little bit about, oh, nobody laughed. I didn't know if that came up or not. See, this is, watch this again, carefully, slowly. This is the missing link. You'd have to know some things about computers. When this little X comes up here, it just means that link is missing, and they, yeah, okay. Well, they won't get much better than that, I'm sorry to say. The missing link for evolution is not only what's that transitional form between ape-like creatures and human beings, but the concept of information. So again, what is information, and why is this an important ingredient? Let's talk about the two major ideas when it comes to origins. When you stop and think about it, there are really only two possibilities on how everything got here. One possibility is evolution. Evolution is the idea that says origins are the results of natural processes. Origin via just natural events, like the laws of chemistry and physics. Everything got here by, I'm going to choose my terms carefully, and although sometimes people say random events, most evolutionary scientists don't want to use that term. So we'll just say natural processes. For example, friends of mine, Zeb and Martha, their little boy came home one day after learning about evolution in the school, and he turned to his mom and he said, "Mom, they said in school that we all came from monkeys. Is that true?" And Martha thought about it a little bit, and she said, "You know what, son? I've really never met everyone on your father's side of the family." So one idea of origins is the concept of evolution. And although we're not going to discuss it this evening, I need to tell you that theistic evolution is really just the same thing as evolution. Sometimes people throw something in front of it. It's still the same thing. Now, contrast that idea of natural processes with creation. Excuse me. The creation model says things arrived via a supernatural process, via God. There's an important distinction there. God is intelligent, and that's pretty important for our discussion here. Origins via supernatural processes. One thing I'm going to say a couple times this evening that I want you to remember is creation is a reasonable idea. Pastor mentioned Bill Nye, the science guy, and this wasn't the look I was going for. The president of Concordia University, Wisconsin, Dr. Pat Ferry, always wears bow ties, so I thought I'd do it too because maybe it'd lend an aura of credibility to. I'd seem more authoritarian to you, etc. But Bill Nye, the science guy, would say, creation? That's a ludicrous idea. His most recent book is Undeniable. Basically, why evolution is true and creation is a fairy tale. But I'm here to tell you as a scientist that the idea of creation is more reasonable than the idea of evolution. So when you're out there interacting with people, please don't let anybody tell you, "Oh, creation, that's a totally unrealistic idea." It's an extremely reasonable idea. And if you came here this evening thinking, "I'm not sure, what is it, evolution or creation?" I hope that you'll hear that there is some good evidence to support the idea that creation is reasonable. Why? There are no missing links in creation. We don't have to dream up some connections. There's nothing missing in the idea as there is in the evolution model. In other words, creation can explain the origin of information. This is what I'll be focusing on today. Where did information come from? Everybody has to have an explanation for this. It's one thing to try to dream up explanations for where human beings came from, but even more importantly, where did information come from? Creation is the only model that has an explanation for that. Again, creation is reasonable because someone who subscribes to creation can tell you where information came from. I love this verse from Philippians, and when you look at it in the ESV, it gives it a different slant than others, and I like the word. Let your reasonable, I can't even say it though, I like the word, just can't say it. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. Christianity is a reasonable theology. Creation is a reasonable explanation for origins. Let's talk about the origin of human beings. When it comes to creation, how did human beings get here? Just remember that if you read through the book of Genesis, and by the way, I won't tell you all of the biblical references here, but I would encourage you to look those up. I've had people tell me, well, creation, that's only found in Genesis. That's just such a small portion. No, the concept of creation is found throughout the biblical text. From Genesis through Malachi, the 39 books of the Old Testament, from Matthew through Revelation, the 27 books of the Old Testament, the biblical text affirms time and again this concept of creation. It's kind of an integral thread woven throughout the biblical text. But when you read these, you're going to discover some things about people. People are unique. God created human beings distinctly and specially. In the evolution model, there would have to be a gradation between different things, like gorillas are just a little less human. And I'm sure you've heard this before. Chimps and human beings, 98% similarity in their DNA. Well, first of all, that's not an accurate figure. And secondly, it's very misleading. Why? Because if we compare clouds and watermelons, they are 99% similar in their construction. Okay, they're basically water, right? But at the same time, we know those things to be vastly different. So human beings are distinct. Human beings were created for a special purpose. And Adam and Eve were created in the image of God originally. That idea of image relates to their holiness, their special communion with God. And of course, unfortunately, because of sin, they then separated themselves from God. So that's been tarnished and partially lost. But at the same time, human beings do still possess an image of God. You know, there's this little known story that's not recorded in Genesis about Adam and Eve. One day, Adam was out working late, and when he came home, because he came home late, Eve was a little suspicious. She said, Adam, where have you been? I've been out working. Were you seeing anybody else? I said, there's nobody else. But Eve, unfortunately, was still a little suspicious. So in the middle of the night, Adam wakes up. Eve's sitting there poking him. And Adam says, what are you doing? And Eve says, well, I just wanted to make sure there wasn't anybody else. And Adam says, by poking me? Yeah, I'm counting your ribs. The creation story in Genesis is more than just a story. It's an actual historic narrative that tells us truly how we all got here. Human beings are distinct. Let me talk about that a little bit, and then we'll move on to the concept of information. There are some unique aspects about human beings that my evolutionary friends really can't explain. For example, symbolic language. Now, animals communicate, both with each other, and we can communicate with animals too. My wife is an equine scientist. She can tell our horses to do things just by doing this. I can't do that. Okay? We can communicate with animals communicate with each other, but human beings do it in a very different manner. Human beings use a symbolic, grammatical language. Language, trying to explain how language appeared naturally, is an impossible task. The only way you can describe or understand how language appeared is to say that it was created by an intelligent act. You probably know what this is, right? Anybody know what this is? That's the Rosetta Stone. we could not decipher Egyptian hieroglyphics. Now you're thinking, what? Really? Yeah. Up until the 1800s, we really couldn't understand Egyptian hieroglyphics. They're not just some funny symbols there, it's a very detailed and complex language. The only reason we were able to decipher them is by finding the Rosetta Stone that had not only hieroglyphics, but also the Greek of what the meaning was. And so then, still, after about a 10-year study, did we begin to decode what that was. Human language is very different. I've had people tell me, well, that's no different than just talking to your dog and say, here, go fetch the ball. Well, this is what I want you to tell your dog. In 3 weeks, I want you to do the following. Your dog has no concept of time. I want you to give your dog a choice between 3 different activities. No. A grammatical symbolic language is very different than communication, just saying do one thing or another. Now, where did this come from? Where did language come from? If you subscribe to an evolutionary idea, it had to develop naturally from grunts and different things like that. But I'm going to show you that's impossible. So one distinction, one unique characteristic of human beings is we use language, just as I'm doing here. Now, I want to tell you, we are not specious here. We would have allowed anything to come to this presentation. We would have allowed chimps and orangs and gorillas to come. They were free to come. I noticed that none of them chose to come. I guess they just couldn't read those flyers, nor could they appreciate the humor that might be here. So number 1 is symbolic language. Number 2, I'll impress her with a palindrome. Madam, I'm Adam. Eve. You don't understand. See, these are like jokes. Then people laugh. By the way, try to tell your smart gorilla a joke and see what happens. Doesn't work at all, does it? Nope. Second major difference between human beings and other kinds of life. See, again, my evolutionary friends would say, well, there's not a big difference between apes and human beings. Humans have just a slightly bigger brain. No, not it at all. The concept of abstraction. Abstraction is the ability to take complex things, simplify them, and express them in a language. Abstraction is the ability to take something complex and then explain it. Professors like me think we can actually do this. Probably not very well, but that's a unique human characteristic. By the way, many folks think that abstraction means, I hear this all the time, students walking out, that was an abstract lecture. And they think that means confused, cloudy. To abstract something means exactly the opposite. Take something real, concrete, and complex, and simplify it such that it can be understood. For example, if we were going to discuss Einstein's special theory of relativity, we would hope somebody could make that understandable. Would you please explain it so I can understand it? Good. So, would you like to see Einstein simplified? Thanks for laughing. By the way, I can't draw this. My daughter Sabrina, she actually drew this. And you're supposed to laugh, but this does point out an important idea. See, on the left, even though you never met Al, because he died before you were born, maybe, okay, you've seen pictures of him, sort of looks like him. But notice what we've done is we've removed the detail, such that on the right, then, we have what's the central theme and idea. If I just showed you that right panel, you'd say, well, I know it's a human being. I can tell that. But, big nose, facial hair might be me. When we add more detail, then we see something. But this is a unique human ability to take real things, concrete things, and express them as ideas that are simplified. Animals don't do that. Creativity. Human creativity and inventiveness. Yes, I know that beavers build dams, and we have a woodchuck that's living under my porch eating up the wood there and, digging up stuff. But that is not technology. Human beings uniquely think about science, think about principles, and then put that into use to develop tools, technological tools. The inventiveness and creativity of human beings flows directly from the fact that we were created in God's image. And another characteristic that I should mention too is this idea of beauty. Why should beauty exist at all? Sometimes people say, well, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, so what you think is beautiful is different than mine. How does that support the idea of creation? Everybody recognizes such a thing as beauty. Different cultures and different people might have a slightly different opinion of truly what is aesthetically pleasing. But given the choice, you'd rather have a beautiful car than an ugly car. Given the choice, you'd rather have this cool bow tie that I have rather than the one that you have, right? So even though we might have different tastes, we all objectively recognize this concept known as beauty. Beauty is a mental construct that shows that there's a mind behind the idea. If you can come up with an idea, we would say, hey, your mind developed that. Well, what mind developed the idea of the beauty in nature? For an evolutionary scientist, there is no answer. For a creationary scientist, there's a very reasonable answer. God himself expressing the beauty of his own soul in the creation that we see. Now, I know some of you are excited because if you're following along my notes, I'm at the bottom of the page. There's another side! Fooled you! A teacher trick. All right. So, what I'm going to share with you now is something that evolution cannot explain. The best they can do is say this is not really a problem, or Dr. Richard Dawkins, some of you may have heard that name, has said, well, it's, you're just throwing out a tautology. He doesn't even know what the word means. This is such a tremendous missing link for evolution that everything else pales in comparison. Trust me, people will continue to unearth stone tools and date them at 3 million years ago, and then have the other story in this month's Scientific American. Okay. Oh, now we have a different missing link here. Those are still going to come. But this thing is never going to be solved by evolution. It can't at all. What's the origin of information? Let's investigate that. I'm a computer scientist. I base what I do as a computer scientist on a couple principles. And one of those principles is something called information theory. Does that sound scary? Yeah, it really can be. I mean, I had 3 courses of this as a graduate student. It could be really ugly and horrible. Let's do the simple version. Can we abstract that? Sure, you bet. It's actually really easy to understand. But if information theory were not true, we would not be here today. And we certainly wouldn't have any computer technology today, because it's all based on this idea. Let me use a simple example for you. Think about a book. Imagine you've just read a good book. Now, if you were students, I'd tell you, don't think about your textbook. Okay? First of all, they've never read it. And secondly, it's not good. But think about a good book. You just read a good book. And you find a friend, and you say, wow, I just read this great book. I want to tell you all about it, and I'd like to find more that the author wrote. And your friend interrupts and says, what do you mean, author? Well, you know, the person who wrote the book. And you list the author's name. And your friend says, did you see this person write the book? Well, no, I didn't. Do you have any kind of evidence that this person even exists? I mean, have you seen this person? Is there a YouTube video of this person writing the book? Well, no, there really isn't. Then, how do you know that book had an author? You'd say, what is wrong with you? What possibly could possess you to think that we'd have a book that somehow wrote itself? Obviously, books have authors. Now, how do you prove that to your skeptical friend? Answer, you cite information theory. It's easy. The information content, the book, points to an intelligent author. That's the way it works. If you have, trust me, I waited, like several weeks for the words to form on your handout. Never happened. I finally had to do it myself. Dumb computer. Information points to an intelligent author. So, if your favorite book is Chuck Norris Against All Odds, even if you've never met Chuck Norris, even if you haven't downloaded his latest video game on your phone, even if you don't have a signed poster by Chuck Norris, as I do, because my wife got that for me. Thank you, dear. You know there's a real person behind that. If you tried to claim that nobody wrote that book, the book just did itself, people would rightly laugh you off the stage. Do you see where this is going? There's an idea of origins that basically says the book wrote itself. Don't work that way. Let me tell you how it actually works instead. Okay? Some of you know this. Chuck Norris doesn't read books. He stares them down to get the information he wants. If you don't know the Chuck Norris shtick, Chuck Norris is one of these macho guys, and there's all kinds of wild, some people say made-up facts about him, like that one there. Or Chuck Norris didn't actually write his book. The words assembled themselves out of fear. Yeah. Okay. Now we laugh at those things because even though Chuck Norris is this big macho guy, that's not going to happen. He can't just stare it down and somehow get the information in his brain, nor will the words randomly self-assemble out of fear. There had to be an intelligent author behind a book. Let's think about a different example. Think about a computer. Let's say that you're a smart person, and you are, but somehow you just landed on this planet. You knew nothing about computers. So you find a computer, there's nobody there to tell you what it's all about and help you, so you start investigating it. You've got lots of tools. You're the forensic scientist. You've got all these tools, and you start, please don't take my computer apart. I'm still doing this presentation. And you start taking it all apart, and you open it up inside, and you find all these little things in there. And you look at it, you take out your scanning electron microscope, and you examine everything. You would conclude that the only thing that's there is what we call hardware, the physical components of the computer. But you know what? There's something more to a computer than just hardware. That's software. That's the program. That's the instructions. If you just somehow investigated the computer in depth, you would never find that because you can't see software. Trust me, I'm a computer scientist. You could trust me on this. You can't see software. You can see what it does. You can see the effects of it. You can see my PowerPoint presentation running here. But there's no way to see software because it's not a physical thing. It's an informational thing. It's sort of like your brain. The famous quip, the brain surgeon. Hey, I've done surgery on thousands and thousands of brains, and I've never seen a thought. You're exactly right. Because the information is something different than the physical stuff up here. Those are separate components. Let's say you even came to the conclusion that, oh, there is this other thing besides the physical hardware there, there's this software. Would you conclude that somehow the hardware birthed the software? Does your computer hardware somehow magically generate the software? No. It's human beings that create that. And as we know, rather imperfectly, don't they? Yeah. Or maybe you've never used a computer before. But nobody believes that somehow the hardware develops the software. That had to be added to it by an intelligent programmer. All right. So, here's my origin quiz. We have two choices when it comes to where did everything come from. You have evolution, which says natural processes. And you have creation that says a supernatural intelligence did it. All right, here's my quiz. I'm going to show you an object, and I want you to tell me, was this the result of a natural process or an intelligent act? Now, why don't you say natural process? That is natural stuff there. That's granite. That's a rock. If you were just tootling along through South Dakota and looked over there and saw that, that is a rock. That's natural stuff. So since it's natural stuff, it must have had a natural origin, right? No, that's ridiculous. Rocks don't somehow grow faces on them, right? Okay. You know how that got there. It was carved by human beings following an intelligent plan and carrying it out. That's interesting. That is natural stuff. It's a rock. But yet we know that it had an intelligent origin. Why do you know? Because those faces convey information. And where you have information, you must have intelligence. Information theory simplistically says information comes from intelligence. Information theory simplistically says information comes from intelligence. So if I have information, ultimately that must have come from intelligence. If I have information in terms of software, that must have originally come from some intelligence. If I have information in a book, that must have originally come from intelligence. Books don't assemble naturally. Computers don't assemble naturally. Mount Rushmore did not assemble naturally. Information theory says no. So, let me try to make this straightforward. If you peruse an evolutionary textbook and strip away everything that they're saying, they'll ultimately say this: to get the universe and life and diverse life in human beings, origins is a result of three things. That's a little too simplistic, right? What's the M, T, and E? Matter plus, pardon me? Time? Energy. Wow, you know this. Have I said that before? Matter, time, and energy. That's just natural stuff, right? Matter is stuff like granite. Okay? We know what time is, maybe. And we know what energy is. So, we could postulate that Mount Rushmore is a result of just the matter, the granite, and over vast periods of time there was erosion and maybe a lightning strike and who knows what, and then those faces ended up there. That's the evolutionary formula in a nutshell. Evolution says everything got here, including us, just as a natural process. The creationary, I always use the term creationary. And that sounds funny to people, I know. But it's the exact analog to evolutionary. I mean, if you can be an evolutionary scientist and talk about an evolutionary idea, creationary is the exact analog. I'm sorry I'm a scientist, that's the way I talk. Many people use the term creationism, which I find funny. There are not too many isms that we look at as a positive sense. And even the few that might be, we sort of look at those as, well, okay, that's a thing, but you can't really, there's not any substance to it. And I wonder if that wasn't the point that Bill Nye, my friend, the science guy, evolution man, would make. Yeah, he always calls creation creationism. But there's much more science in this than in evolution. The creationary formula is this. Creationary scientists don't say evolution is wrong. You've got to have matter, you've got to have time, you've got to have energy. But creationary scientists like me say there's something missing. Oh, the missing link is information. You've got to have information also. Creation can talk about where that information came from. Let's see. If you need an intelligent author for a book, I guess when it comes to life, we also need an intelligent author. Missing link is information. And make sure it's abundantly clear, because some people have asked me, well, where's the information around here? Answer, I see that you brought 30 trillion cells with you today. Thanks for bringing them all with you. It's called your body. In each of those 30 trillion cells, there is information. A lot of information. Much of it, although not all, is packed into DNA molecules in the nucleus of every one of those 30 trillion cells. Most of the DNA in you, there is so much information there. It makes Wikipedia look like a child's book. There is so much information in every single cell in your body. It is almost beyond belief. And the problem is when geneticists, every time we look a little further, how many people have heard of junk DNA? I'm not going to ask you. You can raise your hand. It's okay. I won't ask you what that is. Anybody hear of junk DNA? A few people. Geneticists, evolutionary geneticists used to talk about junk DNA a lot because there was a lot of stuff what's that doing there? It looks like, there's no such thing as junk DNA. DNA is so immensely complex. It's a miracle that we can understand what's going on inside that at all. But here's the point. DNA is information. DNA is information. It's the information that tells what color will your eyes be, how much melanin, how dark will your skin be, how tall you will be, etc. Question. Where did that information come from? There's only one valid scientific answer. It must have come from intelligence. Originally, that information had to come from intelligence. Now, we know where your DNA came from. It came from your parents. And they're from their parents. But originally, it had to come from an omnipotent creator. That we call science. It's called information theory. To suppose that information arose naturally somehow is not science. Something else. If I were smarter, I could explain DNA to you. Here's a simplistic explanation. Hey, we learned about DNA in 8th grade biology, right? And it's a bunch of stuff, and RNA goes on and does this stuff. But basically, it's this long strand, and it tells you some stuff, right? Good. A little more complex than that. First of all, DNA is both information and program. Computer scientists would call this an object-oriented system. DNA isn't just information. It's also instructions. It's a program, too. Here's another interesting thing about DNA. You can read a DNA strand forward, in one direction, and it will give meaning. It will code for a protein. DNA basically, there's lots of, and it makes proteins, and that does other things in your body. You can also read that same strand of DNA backwards. And it also makes perfect sense, and it will code for a different protein. Earlier I showed you what a palindrome is, right? Reads the same forward and backward. Adam, I'm Adam, and just switch all that. Imagine writing a book that was a palindrome. Meaningful book. And you could read it forward, and then you can read it backwards. Oh, I guess it's not junk after all. Oh, and you know what? We don't just read it in 2 dimensions. DNA is a 3-dimensional object. So depending upon how DNA decides to fold, it'll give a different meaning. Trying to even explain how complex DNA is tough. It's especially tough for me because when I was a little boy, you're going to find this hilarious. People talked about the simple cell. I mean, I'm not kidding you. People say, oh yeah, the simple cell. And this is a picture in my biology book. See, you got a cell wall, cell door, cell window, cell floor. Thanks for that. It is so immensely complex. We don't have a clue what's happening there. Do you suppose that this began through random chance chemical processes? You may choose to believe that if you will. I hate to burst your bubble, but that's not scientific. Listen, if Chuck Norris says creation is reasonable, then it's absolutely reasonable. I got to draw this to a conclusion, but I need to share a little story with you to help with this idea of, because I've talked about information and I said it has to come from intelligence. But now the question is, so what's intelligence? Well, 2 friends of mine, Zeb and Zeke, you don't know the backstory. They can't find a good job that suits them. So they're on job 29, and they are ditch diggers. Now, you can't think about, this is a great May 2nd, right? I mean, it's 45 degrees and rainy and windy, but imagine it's the middle of July, and they're out digging a ditch in the hot sun, and they're sweating up a storm. And Zeke looks up, and in the distance, he sees their supervisor, who's sitting under the shade of this big oak tree, drinking lemonade. And Zeke says, hey, Zeb, how come the supervisor gets to sit under this oak tree drinking lemonade? We got to work in the hot sun. Zeb says, oh, I don't know. Zeke says, well, go ask him. So Zeb, excuse me, Mr. Supervisor, why do you get to sit under the shade of this tree drinking lemonade while we have to work in the hot sun? The supervisor looks up and says, Zeb, the answer is intelligence. Oh, thank you, sir, thank you. So Zeb goes back, and Zeke says, did you find out? Yes, I did. Well, why is that? He said, intelligence. Zeke says, what's that? Zeb says, I don't know. Well, go ask him. So Zeb puts down his shovel, he walks up, excuse me, Mr. Supervisor, would you explain intelligence to me? The supervisor sets down his glass and he stands up and he says, Zeb, it's a really difficult concept, but let me illustrate it for you. Supervisor puts his hand, he's under this huge oak tree, big trunk. Supervisor puts his hand on the oak tree and he says, now Zeb, I want you to make a fist and I want you to hit my hand as hard as you can. Zeb says, I couldn't do that. Yes, I need to illustrate intelligence. Okay. Zeb makes a fist. As his fist goes hurtling towards the supervisor's hand, of course, at the last minute, the supervisor removes his hand from the tree. Zeb's fist goes, I'll try, I'm going to try it. The supervisor says, that's intelligence. Thank you, sir, thank you. Zeb goes back. Zeke says, did you find out? Zeb says, yes, I did. Well, what is it? Well, Zeke, it's a little hard to explain, but let me illustrate this for you. Zeke, I want you to make a fist, and I want you to hit my hand as hard as you can. The visual jokes didn't work either. I was hoping that one of these would work along the way. Okay. Now, as a Christian, I need to share with you why I like to investigate the concept of creation and why I do like to present about this. For me, creation isn't an end into itself. I mean, it can be. Origins can be very interesting and exciting. But I think as a Christian, the way that we want to think about origins is to point to the Creator. If we aren't using this as a way to point to Christ, the Creator, then we're missing something important. How can I be sure? How can I be so sure of the concept of creation? And the answer is not because of science. I truly believe that science confirms what I understand about creation. But as a matter of fact, I'm getting this idea from the biblical text. God's Word affirms that He did create everything, that He is intelligent, and that He is the source of information. So I look at creation as just another tool that a Christian can use to help remove stumbling blocks. You know, I've talked to some people and I said, why do you accept creation? I'll say, well, because it's in the biblical text. And they'll say, well, I don't believe the Bible. Fair enough. If God created everything, then there ought to be some other evidences, and so then I'll share these other evidences. But truly, I'm not trying to argue somebody into accepting, if we can actually even use that term, which we can't, the fact that God created. But just like any other apologetic, we want to remove the stumbling blocks. As Peter said, as a Christian, we're called to always give an answer for the hope that's in you. Give an apologetic an answer. And if somebody asks me why I accept creation, I can point out both from the biblical text and also from science why that is. There's a couple different verses that I have referenced there. Psalm 33 is a favorite of mine. Psalm 33, verses 6 and 9 says, "By the word of the Lord were the heavens made, the starry host by the breath of his mouth. For he spoke, and it came to be. He commanded, and it stood firm." That is a statement of information theory. What's that saying? An intelligent God spoke, and the information appeared. His intelligence was necessary to create information. The reference from Matthew 19 is actually Jesus himself speaking. The Pharisees were trying to trick him. It was a question about marriage and divorce. And Jesus answered, "Haven't you read that in the beginning the Creator made them male and female, husband and wife?" Jesus himself quoted directly from Genesis, took it as literal truth, and said the Creator made human beings. The one from Paul in Romans is probably known by most folks here. When Paul says in Romans 1:20, whoa, I didn't put that one down. Does anybody have it? I bet I have it on this one here. Whew, good thing. "For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived." What Paul is saying is, even outside of the biblical text, if you look at nature, you can tell that there was a creator. His invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. When an evolutionist says, nope, there's no God, or when Dr. Richard Dawkins was asked, if it turns out that there is a God, what would you say? And his answer was, Why didn't you give me more evidence that you existed? I guess he never opened his eyes in the morning, did he? And look around. It's obvious. Now, as a Christian, you need to understand there's no way we could prove creation outside of the biblical text. As a matter of fact, as the writer of the book of Hebrews says, you know, Hebrews 11, that's that great faith chapter. And before everybody else is commended for their faith, do you know who's commended? We are. You are, if you're a Christian who accepts creation. In Hebrews 11, by faith we understand the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was made out of what was not visible. We accept this by faith. Faith in God's Word. If you're interested in sharing creation with other people, I just want to leave a couple things with you. First of all, be sure to present this in a positive light. It's easy to show the fallacies and problems with evolution. And in order to contrast things, I've done that with you today. But I would never share with somebody who accepts evolution, oh, evolution, that's a stupid idea. You know why that is? If somebody came up to you and said, man, I really like Corvettes. You say, Corvettes? Those are like stupid cars. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Oh, you're really going to want to carry on the conversation with them, aren't you? Yeah, thank you very much. So if you're talking with somebody, they say evolution, you say, oh, well, that's dumb, that's stupid, here's all the reasons. I always listen. I think that's a good approach. And then I'll say, that's interesting. Now, have you thought about this idea? And of course, for me, it is information theory. You ever thought about where all the information in our cells came from originally? And it's a pretty non-threatening way to do it. So if you're going to share evidences, I'd suggest that you be positive about it. And here's my other hot tip. My wife hates it when I do this. This is my wife, and she's hot. But my tip is, this. Pick one thing. My wife is an equine scientist. So if she was going to talk to somebody, she could just talk. She's talked to me. I don't understand this. She talks about the design of the hoof. There is no way, if you understand the design of the horse's hoof, that you could conclude that somehow this happened by chance, random events. There's too much information necessary. There's too obvious of a design here. So, be positive and pick one thing. Nobody knows all the answers. I don't know all the answers. You don't have to know all the answers. You just have to have one legitimate argument. So, oh, it's a cat picture. Found it on the internet. This is Skeptic Cat. Skeptic Cat doesn't believe what you say just because you say it. Skeptic Cat wants some answers, some evidence, some reasons. For the honest skeptic. Now, there are plenty of dishonest skeptics. There are plenty of people that you try to talk to. It doesn't matter what you say, they're not going to listen. But for the honest skeptic, we can have a number of positive evidences, scientific evidences, relate them to God's Word, and give a good, reasonable explanation for ultimate origins. And unless you don't live in the world like I do, you're going to run into plenty of honest skeptics. So my challenge for you is, can you give them an answer? Now, in the 2 hours that we've been doing this, there's likely some other questions. And I don't know if we have time or not. We can probably entertain questions. But at the bottom of the second side of that sheet, I have a number of different websites that I think are good resources if you're interested. Let me just highlight a couple. The first one on that list is the Lutheran Science Institute, LSI. I'm an advisory member to the board of LSI. The Lutheran Science Institute is a group of WELS people who have taken the initiative to think about how do we discuss origins in a decidedly Lutheran confessional context. The LutheranScience.org website then has a lot of, I think, good information there. So I'd commend that to you. Lots of other ones on that sheet. Another one that I'll mention is I do happen to serve on the board of directors of the Creation Research Society. The CRS is the oldest scientific society dedicated to investigating the creation model of origins. There are I don't remember the number, 600, 800, 1,000 different scientists with advanced degrees investigating and committed to the fact that God created the heavens and the earth. By the way, if somebody ever tells you that no real scientist accepts creation, I don't know if you think I'm a real scientist or not, but if you've heard one and go to this site, I mean, there are hundreds who do, for sure. And then just one more. I'm a faculty member at Concordia University, Wisconsin. The Concordia University system has a loose society called the Society of Creation. Once a year, we host a seminar, I suppose. Be over 2 days in July this year. If you're interested in some more in-depth stuff, we have some world-class speakers here. Dr. Russ Humphreys, Dr. Don DeYoung, other people. We're going to be talking about the age of the earth, which I know is always an interesting topic. So if you go to this site, you'll find out we're having our conference this year at Concordia University in Mequon, July 7th and 8th, something like that. I can't remember. Okay, great. If we have a little bit of time, I'd be happy to entertain questions. I don't know the answers, but we could do that, or should we just let people go?
I have some questions.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned, I just want to comment a little bit on the beauty comment that you
Yeah.
had earlier. And I always think it's interesting that intrinsically we know that a kitty, a new kitten is cute.
Mm-hmm.
And yet if the kittens run over on the road, it's instinctively yucky to us.
Mm-hmm.
And no one has to teach us that.
Mm-hmm.
How did that come about?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a neat thing. My specific question is, you mentioned language, and I remember reading that infants are born with, like they're coded, they're ready to understand language. They're able to pick out certain words and sentence structures like the templates there, and the sounds just have to be filled in. Do you have any more information on that you can share?
Yes, you're exactly right. Human minds are wired and geared for language. You know, when babies will make noises and sounds and things like that, those are not just random things. We know that babies are actually trying to synthesize, babies are trying to actually put things together. They're working out how does, as Pastor put it, this template, how does this fit with other things? And yeah, you're exactly right. Human beings are inherently wired to deal with language, unlike any other creature. Yeah, I suppose I could. Is that helpful enough? That's probably about the limit of my knowledge anyway. Okay, I know.
I remember correctly. I'm tracking that.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. And the other thing is, things happen too as you get older. You probably know and have heard that it's easier to learn a second, third, fourth, 10th language the younger that you are. This is actually true. It's really hard for college students to learn Greek and Hebrew, isn't it? It is. If we did that when they were like 5, it would be actually easier. Apes don't have that innate wiring to do it. Yeah, good question. Sir? Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
I have a question, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, and I don't know how intelligent you are on DNA, but does, in your opinion, do identical twins have identical DNA?
The question is, do identical twins have identical DNA? If you are truly identical, not fraternal, the convenient answer is yes. Beyond that, I'm not technically a geneticist, so the convenient answer is, yep, that one egg split and there's an identical copy in each one. The question comes up, what happens later on? Do they both develop identically or not? So it's a good question. I'll just say, I think so. Wait a minute, I paid good money. You don't know the answer? Okay. Sir?
Yeah, I'm grappling with a curious area of information
Mm-hmm.
that's beyond the realm of matter, time, energy.
Yes.
What I'm getting at?
Yes.
What? You don't know what I'm getting at.
No, I do know what you're getting at. You're saying information is something else.
No, there is an area of information that's beyond matter, time, and energy, and I'm going to call it mathematics.
Okay.
And it seems you could argue that was even before creation. If we're here or not, there's still mathematics.
Mm-hmm.
Sequence of prime numbers,
Mm-hmm.
relationships, one number greater than the next. Of course, the symbols would vary from place to place, but the concepts are the same. Preceding, it's universal, transcends universal.
Mm-hmm.
That almost means to me that there is intelligence beyond even maybe even before creation, if that is allowed to say.
It's allowed. Yeah. Okay.
But is that
Mhm.
closer to God?
Sure. Absolutely. So the comment is, well, first of all, information is something different. It's hard to quantify. And secondly, specifically, if you think about the concept of mathematics, when you look at the history of mathematics, there are two different schools of thought. One school of thought says mathematics developed by human beings because it's found out it had some certain practical applications. But the other school of thought is mathematics descended from God. Now, sometimes that's even phrased not as the triune God, the true God, but it came from an Egyptian god or a Sumerian god or something like that. But many folks, even non-Christians, have recognized that mathematics does seem to, in your words, transcend what's happening here. And if you wanted to argue that mathematics existed before creation, I wouldn't have a problem with it because God existed before creation. And I don't think it's much of a stretch to say that God was a pretty good mathematician. The natural laws that exist were established by God. And we think about or we communicate the ideas of the natural laws using mathematics. Think about gravity. I mean, how do we... we know what it means, but how do we communicate it? And the answer is by using Newton's formulas. Right, exactly. Great comment. Here's your chance to stump me. That is so easy to do. Sir?
Some of that may be answered by John 1:1.
Absolutely.
The beginning was the Word.
And the Word was...
And it represents information there, although it represents Christ
Yes.
as well.
Yeah.
So the idea, the Word,
Mm-hmm.
not a physical thing, that was before creation.
Right.
So get a little bit of an answer there from the Scripture.
Absolutely. Yeah, great comment. John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. We could see that before the actual creation, the Word, that information idea existed, especially in the person of Christ. Great comment.
Working from your notes,
Oh,
it says information only comes from intelligence.
yes.
If that's true,
Mm-hmm.
then we are in the presence of intelligence. Thank you. Because you gave us a lot of information.
Thank you very much.